thanks for joining us. We're excited to have you here.
Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Let's just start off with a little bit of a introduction to like who you are and just kind of what you've built with BitNote, and just kind of give folks a little bit of a background on kind of how you got here and what you're building.
Yeah, I think everybody has their unique story of how to get into crypto, but most of my life is actually spent in the non-crypto world. So after I graduated Cornell in economics, I spent the better part of 10 years working my way up the corporate ladder in a medical software company called For Patient Care. I was a very lowly tech support agent in that business starting out. So I'd like do remote doctor tech support, like fix doctors' computers. And then eventually I became president of that firm over the years. Grew it, scaled it. It was eventually acquired by a company called Essilor. And then after that, I spent about 8 years building health and wellness apps. So a couple of successful apps in the App Store, helping people with their anxiety, depression, chronic pain, insomnia, all sorts of problems. And, I first fell into crypto. Like I bought Bitcoin and Ethereum for a long time, but like I really started getting active on chain in the kind of early 2021 timeframe. It's like DeFi summer happened in 2020. Lots of DeFi protocols were launching in beginning of 2021. I would get phone calls from friends who's like, hey, like, look at this like crazy 100,000% APY. Like you got to jump in and play in the sandbox. And so that's what I did. I played in the sandbox. I checked out what was going on. That led to all sorts of crazy things. I launched a blockchain gaming guild called Starship Guild. We scaled that to 2,400 players. It was like one of the biggest blockchain gaming guilds in the world at the time. We launched a school called Invisible College, teaching people how to onboard into crypto. And so if you were holding one of the NFTs, you got access to all the curriculum and the courses. So that was super. We launched over 20 courses from different creators. That was super fun. But in all of that, I kept running into the same problem. And it was like this very same first principle problem over and over again, which was, where do you store your seed phrase? Like, where do you put it? And, if something happens to you, how does it get passed on? To your loved ones, to your family, to your spouse, whoever it might be. And so, especially when we were doing Invisible College, the school, we onboarded, we had over 1,000 students. Like I would sit there and I would like walk people through. It's like, okay, like, download MetaMask or download SafePal wallet, like, set up your seed. And they would stop and like, where do I put this seed phrase? And there's not a super great answer. Like, for example, the typical crypto answer is, like etch it into steel, put it in a fireproof safe that's like somewhere secret in your house, bolted to the ground. Only you know the code. It's like, that's great if you're Batman, but like if you're a normal human being, you're not going to do that. And so many people, they turn to these centralized password managers like 1Password or LastPass. And, they tend to have pricey subscriptions. They're a for-profit business that could go out of business at any time. And because they're closed source, you never know what's actually happening with your data. So we saw with LastPass, for example, people got hacked left and right with LastPass, and they lost tens of millions of dollars in crypto because of that. And so you can't really trust closed source centralized systems with your decentralized assets. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? So, a lot of people, they turn towards like open source password managers like a Bitwarden, for example, or a Proton Pass. But, people don't realize that with Bitwarden, they're opinionated about what VPN you use to access your data. So if you use the wrong VPN, they actually don't let you access your vault. Or even worse, if somebody gets a hold of your email address, even if they don't have your master password credentials to the vault, they can delete all of your Bitwarden data just hacking your email address without the master password, right? So totally crazy. And actually, I happened upon a story the other day on Reddit. A user posted that they had a Proton Pass account. They had all of their information in there. And then they logged in one day and Proton Pass had banned their account. Like, imagine you have all of your sensitive information in this account, and then you log in and Proton Pass is like, sorry, we banned you. And this user was like, I don't know why they banned me. They didn't say, right? And they had to like make a fury on Reddit and like try to get a hold of support.
Yeah.
It was a total mess, right? So ultimately, again, even if it's an open source system, you cannot trust centralized systems with your decentralized assets. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Right? So, and God forbid, like you put your secrets in like an Apple account or Microsoft account or Google account or something. Like, we hear all the time people getting banned on Google, like, oh, they did the wrong thing on YouTube. All of a sudden, their Google account was banned, and and now they can't access their Google Password Manager, for example, right? Like, it just like you keep running into issues, or like your phone gets stolen and the PIN code gets stolen, and all of a sudden somebody has access to all of your data because they stole your phone, they stole your PIN. It's like, that's not great. It's like you're looking at these attack surfaces, and again, you run into the problem of where do you store your really sensitive information? And that's the problem that we were stuck with, where it's like we had C phrases, we had private keys, we had all of this like sensitive information we want to store. And it's like, where can you go that's decentralized, censorship resistant, trustless, permissionless, permanent, private, that you can store this information and access it without jumping through hoops? And we didn't find it, so we decided to build it, and that's how we got to BitNote.
That's amazing. And I think it's always great when we hear a lot in crypto where we are creating solutions to problems that don't exist, right? Like you create something and then you think about how it could be used. So, it's great to hear that you're addressing an actual problem that not only you encountered, but you're seeing others encountered in various forms through different systems, and you're seeing these conversations happen all the time. So you have this idea, and you obviously you're thinking about ways to address it. So then you start thinking about the environment that you're going to build in, and you've obviously have experience in different ecosystems of the crypto market. What led you to build on Avalanche, and what were some like specific things that kind of within the tech stack or within how the architecture was set up that kind of made the most sense for BitNote to be built and launched there?
It was a really interesting exploration. We started looking at different chains that we wanted to potentially build on, and we knew that we wanted it to be an EVM chain because that's what we were most comfortable in. So we had to be in an EVM environment. That meant like Aptos and Sui and Solana. Like, okay, we're not going to build on those chains. So when we looked at EVM chains, decentralization is very important for us, right? To solve the actual core problems that we're talking about,
Right.
It would make no sense to build a highly decentralized application and then put it on a very centralized network. Yeah, like that you've defeated the purpose of building a decentralized app, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at EVM chains and you start looking at higher levels of decentralization, you have Ethereum, you have Avalanche, and then what? Right. So you start looking around and you're like, oh, well, Near has 200 validators. The Cosmos ecosystem is capped around 300 validators. You don't really get above 1,000 validators with higher levels of decentralization in most EVM blockchains. But Avalanche does, right? So Avalanche has something like over 1,500 validators. It's a fairly decentralized network.
Mm-hmm.
And critically, it also has lower fees than Ethereum. So when we're thinking about building a consumer application, it's really hard to justify building on ETH mainnet. And if you decide that you want to go the L2 route, well, again, L2s are very centralized. So when you're talking about storing data for very long periods of time on a decentralized network, you have now defeated the purpose by going on an L2, right? So it's either ETH mainnet or some other highly decentralized EVM. So, ETH mainnet was out because the fees were too high. The scaling wasn't enough. AVAX has some really nice scaling properties. Like as far as EVMs go, it can scale quite a bit more than most other EVMs, and the costs are much more reasonable. I think the thing that most people miss, and for us was really important, especially in building a consumer application, is the time to finality. Even calling it time to finality obscures why it actually matters. It's really like when you do something in the interface, how long is it going to take before it saves? right? So for example, in our system, you're creating a note, right? So like when you go to encrypt the note and save it on the blockchain, how long does that take? And if you're on ETH mainnet, it's going to take 12, 15 seconds, right, to like save on chain. In AVAX, it takes like 1 or 2 seconds, right? And so all that when you're talking about a consumer application that needs to be responsive, that time to finality actually matters quite a bit. And AVAX's novel consensus mechanism gives it like a real edge, frankly, when you're trying to build consumer applications and have them be very responsive. So I think all of those things matter, right? EVM compatibility, really fast transactions, the time to finality, really high levels of decentralization, and then community. Like AVAX as a community, like we kind of joke all the time that the worst thing about, the real joke is like the greatest fudsters of Avalanche are the Avalanche community. Like we're the harshest critics of ourselves in all of blockchain. Right?
Yes.
And I think the flip side of that is, yes, we are the harshest critics of ourselves, but we're also the most supportive in many ways, where it's like we understand a lot of the tech stack and like how powerful it is, and we want to build real things that actually matter and solve use cases. And so oftentimes that sentiment can come off very bearish because we look at other stuff and we're like, oh, it's like another Ponzi game or Ponzi-nomics. Like, why does this really matter? But ultimately, if you're a builder, there's so many supportive people in the AVAX ecosystem, and that, especially for us, we were building something very unique where we're kind of building a decentralized password manager, a decentralized will system. Like we're creating something kind of novel and new, and having that support from the community really helped. It's like getting early users, getting some traction, getting feedback, like all of that's been really great.
Yeah, you bring up a good point too, where it's not necessarily that people are fudding just to FUD. It's they're being critical, right? Because they want things to be successful. They want to focus on things that are actually going to have an impact. And you see that all the time. And I think it's a good thing. And at the end of the day, what it does is it makes everybody in the ecosystem, it makes us think, okay, how do I tell this story so that people understand it? Is this important? It really makes you think about what we're trying to do, because that people are going to be critical of it, right? And I think that's a central part of growth. If no one said anything, we would just go wild and do whatever. And
you don't want a bunch of yes people running around like, oh yes, this is amazing, yes. Like you want people that actually have constructive feedback. Like constructive criticism is really essential in the growth process and the iteration process. And so I think the AVAX community does that well. And that's also why whenever you get some of these like copycats that come from, the ETH ecosystem that come in, like a friend.tech something or Olympus something or whatever, it's like there's a lot of criticality. It's looked at with a critical eye because it's like, can we just do something that isn't that? Like, can we just actually build stuff that solves real problems using this really powerful infrastructure that crypto gives us? So, and I say this as someone, like I built a DeFi protocol on ETH mainnet. I built a school on Solana, the Invisible College. Like, I built a blockchain gaming guild on Ronin, right? Like I have built in a variety of ecosystems. Yeah. So I don't have a particular bias for any ecosystem. It's like pick the right chain for what you're trying to do. Yeah. And every chain has unique properties and kind of unique circumstances around it. And so, the message very, very much isn't like there is always one right chain for every single use case. But the message really truly is that these chains, they have unique properties. They are very interesting. And I think for Avalanche, if you're looking for a mixture of high levels of decentralization, like a cheap transactions, pretty good throughput, fast times to finality, a good community, like that's what AVAX excels at today. And tomorrow, there's all sorts of interesting upside, that we haven't talked about of Bricks and Hyper SDK and, the the new coming changes with the P chain and allowing blockchains to be created as L1s, and there's all sorts of really interesting things happening in the AVAX ecosystem. But again, as a builder, you should really have a discerning eye of like, what are the unique properties of this blockchain, and does that fit with the application that I'm building? And for us, AVAX was a perfect fit for BitNote.
Yeah, those are great points, because I tell people all the time that not everything, Avalanche isn't the best chain for every idea that comes up. It's not the best chain for certain verticals or certain activities that are happening. But like you mentioned, there's a lot of things that are coming down the road that both optimize the performance of the C chain and the other blockchains that are already there through data storage and all these other ways that we can optimize the virtual machines. But then we're making it super easy, simple, cheap to launch your own L1, which helps a lot of people have these like custom execution environments, these things that they really need specific to their project. So we're going to find a lot of opportunities where this architecture specifically lends itself to be the best environment for certain projects, but not all of them. So that's a really good point. That kind of leads me into another question that I wanted to ask, was like, what were some of the challenges that you came across? And kind of like the second part of this would be like advice to others that might start building on Avalanche or looking at Avalanche as the place they want to potentially launch their application. What are some like roadblocks you might have run into, or just challenges that you faced coming into that? And like, what would you say to the next wave of builders to help them do things like a little bit easier, a little bit faster, or things that they could look out for that maybe you had to encounter?
Oh gosh, this is going to turn into a 3-hour episode if we go down too deep down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, but the top one or two.
I think that there are challenges that are unique to Avalanche, and there are challenges that no matter where you're building, you're going to run into these things. Personally, for us, there was a real challenge in building a consumer application that had high levels of decentralization. When you think about BitNote, it's made with very simple tech. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript, the entire application is under a megabyte, well under a megabyte. It's actually hosted on chain. So itself, like the application is on chain itself, because again, we're trying to build a forever machine, a machine that can just sit on chain and do its job for decades and decades without, needing human intervention or a human poking or prodding. And so building that, like no matter what chain we chose, there would be lots of challenges. Like, how do you do authentication? How do you not use any third-party dependencies? Mm-hmm. How do you ensure that you minimize your area to supply chain attacks? How do you allow people to use a local application to communicate directly to the blockchain and also use your website? There's so many areas here where even when we're talking about this very simple idea of storing your sensitive information very securely, you have to think about all of these other things that go along with it, let alone like, how do you build automatic succession so that if something happens to you, the data gets passed down to a beneficiary automatically? Yeah, like, that's wild. There's so many challenges that you have to overcome in order to make something like this a reality that have nothing to do with Avalanche, the blockchain, or whatever chain you decide to build on, right?
Right.
Now, when we talk about the actual challenges that building on chain bring you, there's so many, but I think one, which is really critical, is how do you actually get any testnet crypto? And we ran into this in Ethereum. Like, it was very, very hard to get.
The tokens to be able to do that.
Yeah, because like you want to start testing on chain, but you don't want to test on mainnet. You want to test on testnet. Where do you get the testnet tokens? And so when we were starting out and we were first building on ETH mainnet, it was like getting Gorley ETH was so difficult. It was just like enormously difficult to get testnet ETH. We eventually did, but when we transitioned to building on AVAX, getting testnet AVAX was a challenge at first. Because the faucet was kind of broken. And, I think now that faucet works a lot better. So you can use the testnet faucet inside of the core app to the official Avalanche
Stops all
wallet.
the spam and bots and stuff.
Yeah, like for the longest time, that was really difficult because it was not only difficult for us to get testnet AVAX, but also our beta users who wanted to use the app,
right?
But they were like, okay, how do I get this without pinging you every time that I want to get some testnet AVAX? I think some of those problems I think have been mostly sorted out. I think for every builder on chain, they have to decide what level of decentralization is important to them. And you're building on chain. So like some level of decentralization is probably important to you.
Yeah.
And remember, like decentralization is not a binary, it's a spectrum. You can have low amounts of it, medium amounts of it, high amounts of it. It's not just like a light switch, right? So, and decentralization comes in a lot of different areas. So, the network that you choose, like the blockchain that you're hosting your application on, how decentralized is that? How decentralized is your development process? Can one developer on your team completely introduce a huge supply chain attack on your users?
Right.
Even user access, like if your site goes down, is the only way to access what you're doing through your website? Or can users download the application, run it as a progressive web application? Does it run on a client blockchain model where it's just the user in the blockchain? Or does it run on a more traditional Web 2 model where there's a central server and things are running through the central server in order to process your data? Like there's so many things that you have to decide as a builder. And I think what spectrum on decentralization really matters, especially if you're building on chain. And even if you decide like low levels of decentralization, that might be the right answer for your application and what you're trying to do.